Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down a massive severe weather event that'll take place across the United States later this week. This will bring the threat for numerous to widespread damaging winds, large hail, and multiple tornadoes. I'll give you the latest breakdown on everything that you need to know in this forecast, but let's first begin with what's happening across the United States today that will lead into that threat for severe weather later this week. We're going to actually begin with the west coast of the United States, back over near California. That is where a very strong low pressure system is currently located, and this is what's going to bring the threat for severe weather on Thursday and Friday across a large portion of the United States. It is a very impressive low pressure system, by the way. There is a ton of rainfall over in California. We have inner bands. It almost looks like a hurricane of some sort, but it is not a hurricane. The water temperatures are way too cold over that direction, but it does have some similar characteristics, and this will eventually go over the Rocky Mountains and into the central and northern plains. And this is what's going to eventually bring a threat for severe weather across a large chunk of the United States pretty soon. And then back over just to the north of Michigan this afternoon, we actually have a low pressure system bringing some snow squalls to the northeast, and this will continue over the next few hours before it eventually diminishes, but it is a pretty impressive little low pressure system there as well. Now, in terms of what's going to happen over the next several days, that low pressure system will actually move to the south over areas in Southern California. Eventually going into late Thursday into Friday morning, that is when we'll have a trough really start to strengthen over the central plains, and really going into Friday morning, not a whole lot of severe weather is expected. We'll be primarily just looking at a little bit of snow. It'll extend from the upper Michigan Peninsula back through areas in Wyoming, but eventually going into the afternoon and evening, that is when more concern begins to unravel, as we do have that threat for severe weather across a large chunk of the country. Eventually going into Friday night into Saturday morning, we'll also be watching for the threat of a small winter storm in the Midwest, and eventually going into late Saturday into Sunday, this trough moves quickly off to the north and east. What does this mean for the severe weather potential on Friday? Well, for right now, the Storm Prediction Center has outlined a very large area. It's a big D that extends all the way from Texas back into areas in the Midwest and the Ohio Valley, and this is an area that we'll be watching for some very significant severe weather. We could be talking about numerous to widespread damaging winds, large hail, and multiple tornadoes will also be possible. You want to make sure you have multiple ways to receive warnings on Friday, because we'll be watching a large area for severe weather. Oh, and by the way, there is a hatched area that extends from Iowa back through Arkansas. Anywhere in this red hatch shaded region represents your potential for upwards of 70 to 80 mile per hour damaging winds out of a storm or two, and we could even see a couple of strong tornadoes across this large region. Now, I want to remind you that this is a very large area. Not everybody's going to see severe weather, so there's no reason to panic, but make sure you have a way to receive alerts. That is very critical with this sort of setup. And why is this setup so potent? Why are we going to see so many severe storms? Because what the Storm Prediction Center has essentially outlined to us is that we could see potentially intense and widespread severe storms on Friday. A lot of reasons go into it, one of which is the upper level winds. This is the 300 millibar level. This is where our jet stream is, and we're going to have a negatively tilted trough once we go into Friday, and this is what's going to create a lot of spin in the atmosphere. We're going to have very strong southwesterly winds, which are going to increase the rotation in some of these supercells, and as well as these updrafts, and it's really going to become intense as we go into Friday evening. That is when this low-level jet will get upwards of 140 knots. Now, obviously, that is very strong winds, but that is nowhere near the surface, so no reason to panic about 150 mile per hour winds out of some damaging winds. That's not what we're talking about here. What I am saying is that the ingredients for severe weather are really coming together with this event, and another big thing will be the low-level jet, and this is what helps to rotate supercells a little bit higher off the ground. Again, 700 millibars is a few thousand feet up into the atmosphere, so what we're looking at going into Friday afternoon and evening is a very strong low-level jet. Values upwards of 60 to 80 knots does indicate a moderate to high-end low-level jet, which will be able to help rotate the supercells that do end up developing across anywhere from the Midwest back through the southern plains, and especially even going into the overnight hours Friday night, we very well could see a pretty strong low-level jet all the way back through the Ohio Valley. And this is a much closer view of the low-level jet across the Ohio Valley and as well as the Mississippi Valley, and this is really where we're going to be watching for a very strong low-level jet. You can see the values here in Missouri as well as back through Arkansas, around 65 to 70 knots, and this is really my bigger concern for maybe a tornado threat would be most likely across this region. Now, things may change a little bit as we get closer, but make sure you're on alert, because the damaging wind potential and as well as that tornado potential will likely be the highest in that area. And one of my favorite graphics to look at when we're talking about severe weather weather is the dew points plotted with the winds, because this gives us an idea of where this moisture content is coming from and how far north we could see that severe weather potential. So this is going into Friday afternoon and evening. Look back up here to the north and the Midwest. That is where our low pressure system will be centered. And also look at the winds all coming out of the south. All that moisture is lifting up from the Gulf of Mexico. This is what's going to be able to help create the potential for severe weather across really a large chunk of the United States. This entire area is going to have enough moisture for severe weather. Now, that doesn't mean everybody in this area will see severe weather, because areas along the Gulf Coast probably won't. But the further north you are, where that low pressure system is centered, that is where that greatest severe weather potential will lie, is back from areas basically in the Illinois and Wisconsin border and southwards is where we do have our bigger concern for severe weather. Instability is also a very important factor for severe weather. Instability is essentially like gasoline into a vehicle. This is what helps to fuel severe thunderstorms and help them to be able to develop. And this instability gets quite high the further north you go. We're talking about 1,000 to 1,500 joules per kilogram right along that leading edge where those severe storms will likely develop back in Iowa and as well as Missouri, and eventually going into the Midwest going into Friday evening. We are still watching for values exceeding 500, which is plenty for severe weather to occur back up that direction. Now, the last slide before I show you the timing is the significant tornado parameter. This gives us an idea of where the greatest tornado threat will lie across this area on Friday, and really going into late Friday, closer to about 6 to 7 o'clock, is where the peak, it looks like, of that tornado threat will exist. Now, again, we're a few days out, so things may change a little bit, but for right now, the significant tornado parameter is estimated to be around 3 to 4 across southern Illinois back through southeast Missouri. That is where we might have a bit more of a significant tornado threat. And I did outline earlier in this forecast that this would be probably the area where we see a bit more of a significant tornado threat. Now, obviously, things could change a little bit, but this is where I think that that tornado threat will be a bit higher. Outside of there will still be a tornado threat, but I think it'll be a bit lower than that specific region. But we'll keep you posted with the latest details there. In terms of the timing, we're going to be really watching for some convection to be boiling in the morning, but this will not be severe activity. So some showers, maybe an isolated rumble of thunder during the morning, but by the afternoon, that is when some storms will start to blow up. We'll be watching a lot of different areas, one of which will be potentially northern Illinois, where we might start to see a few thunderstorms develop. We'll be watching for a line of storms to develop back over in Iowa and as well as into Missouri. Another area of convection most likely to develop from Texas back through southeast Missouri. Again, there are a ton of areas that will be watching on Friday, so really hectic forecast is here. But going into late Friday, that is when a line of storms will really start to become more pronounced. That is where we could see a QLCS situation, which means really numerous to widespread damaging winds and the threat for some embedded tornadoes in that line of storms. And eventually going closer to the evening and overnight hours, that is when this just becomes a straight up line of storms moving through areas in Ohio back through Mississippi. And this is where we might still see some damaging winds, but the threat of severe weather will go down as we go through the overnight hours. Behind this, wind gusts will be very high. We are talking about wind gusts upwards of 50 to 60 miles per hour across Illinois, Indiana, and even Missouri, and it's really going to create some havoc with our trampolines. The trampoline meter right now is at an extreme risk across the Midwest and back through the Ohio Valley. We very well could see some flying trampolines as we go into Friday night and even into Saturday morning. Also, going into next week, on next Wednesday, there is a huge slight risk of severe weather. I'll be covering this after we get past this first severe weather threat that is in front of us on Friday. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you're not already. This forecast is brought to you by Platinum Contracting and All Dents Repair.